The door didn't just open, it burst wide as my palm slipped and my purse hit the hospital floor so hard the sound cracked through the room. My husband was sitting on the edge of another woman's bed, feeding her applesauce with the same tenderness he once used on me after surgery. His hand brushed her cheek. He whispered something that made her smile, and on his wrist was the anniversary watch I had worked 3 months of overtime to buy. My name is Eleanor Shaw. I am 54 years old, and on the day I went to confront my husband's mistress, I found out I was the extra in my own marriage. But what they didn't know was that the woman collapsing in that doorway was already planning her counterstrike. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And honestly, it reminds me I'm not alone in this. So go ahead, drop your city in the comments, tap that like button, and let me take you back to where this downfall began, long before the hospital room, long before the lies, long before I realized my marriage had already been replaced. I didn't grow up thinking I would become the kind of woman who could be erased from her own life. But looking back now, the signs were always there, subtle little shadows that stretched longer each year until they swallowed everything I used to be. Long before the hospital room, long before Daniel whispered sweet reassurances into a younger woman's ear, there were pieces of me quietly disappearing. One small compromise at a time. I was 24 the first time I stepped into a hospital as a real nurse, my badge still shiny, my scrub stiff with newness, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and purpose. I came from a small town where girls were taught to be useful, not loud, dependable, not demanding. I fit right in. Even then, I was the kind of person who noticed everything. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the tremble in a patient's fingers when they were pretending not to be scared, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room at 3 a.m. Those details cling to you. They teach you how to read people. That was how I read Daniel the first night we met. It was past midnight, the hospital cafeteria almost empty, the vending machine buzzing like it was dying. He sat alone at a corner table, textbooks spread out around him, hair messy, tie undone, exhaustion pooling in his eyes. He looked too young, too hopeful, too hungry for something bigger than whatever life had handed him. "You look like you haven't eaten in hours," I'd said, setting an extra sandwich on his table. He blinked up at me startled, then smiled wide, sincere, grateful. "You're a lifesaver, literally." I didn't know it then, but that smile would become a compass in my life, guiding me, blinding me, binding me to a future I thought we were building together. Back then, he was struggling through law school, barely keeping his head above water. I was working 3 double shifts a week, sending money home to help my parents eating instant noodles so I could afford bus fare. Somehow, in the middle of 2 exhausting lives, we made each other feel like hope. But even in those early days, the imbalance began. He studied. I worked. He dreamed. I sacrificed. He reached upward. I held everything steady below. "I'll make it up to you someday," Daniel would say, taking my hands in his, kissing my knuckles like I was something precious. "When I become a lawyer, when we have a house, when our life gets easier, you'll finally get to rest." I didn't know it back then, but that promise would slowly turn into a leash. Our first apartment was barely bigger than a storage room. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing. The heat broke every other week. The pipes rattled at night like ghosts were pacing in the walls. But we were young and naive enough to think struggling together meant we'd always be on the same side. I would come home after 16 hours on my feet, legs aching, fingers raw, from scrubbing in and out of rooms, and Daniel would be asleep at the table, his head on an open textbook. I'd wake him gently, heat leftovers, rub his shoulders, tell him he was doing great. He never asked how my day was, and I swallowed it. It carved deeper than I realized. The years blurred. He graduated, got a job at a small firm we scraped by. I worked nights so I could be awake when he came home. I covered rent when his student loans ran dry. I learned to sew so I could tailor his interview suits. I loaned him my car because he didn't have one. I built the foundation beneath his feet and told myself it was love. The first time he forgot our anniversary, he laughed it off. "The case I'm working on is huge, Elle. You know how it is. I made excuses for him. I always made excuses. I didn't know it back then, but that would matter later. When he got promoted, he brought home champagne. When I got a commendation for saving a patient's life, he brought home silence. He said congratulations, but his eyes were already on his phone. On the next case, on the next step forward. Meanwhile, I stayed still so he could move. When we bought our first house, a modest colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac, I felt like we'd reached the finish line. Daniel had made partner. I'd shifted to day shift for stability. Our kids Ethan and Chloe filled the rooms with noise and crayons and dirty sneakers and dreams. Back then, he used to come home and kiss me on the forehead like he still saw me. But as the kids grew, the distance between us did too. He traveled more, stayed late more, became colder in ways that were almost polite. There were warnings I ignored. The night I found unfamiliar perfume in his car. The weekend he said he had a conference but came home sunburned. The nights he showered immediately, saying he felt gross from work. I told myself I was imagining things. Nurses overthink. Nurses assume the worst. Nurses project. That's what I told myself because the alternative was unbearable. I didn't know it back then, but denial becomes its own kind of prison. Years passed. The kids left for college. The house echoed. Dinner became quiet. And Daniel changed. He bought new cologne, new shirts, started going to the gym again, started coming home smelling like a different life. When I asked if everything was okay, he gave me a tired smile. We're just older now, Elle. People drift. I drifted alone. He drifted into someone else. I could feel him slipping like trying to hold water in cupped hands. His phone started living face down. He guarded it the way people guard secrets. His late nights multiplied, his excuses sharpened. Don't be paranoid. You're overthinking. You know my job is demanding. You're acting emotional. The gaslighting was gentle, at first soft-practiced, expert. I see now. It had been building slowly, teaching me to doubt myself in tiny doses. One morning he said, "You missed your doctor's appointment again." I hadn't. He'd rescheduled it without telling me. A week later, "You already told me that yesterday. Are you all right?" I hadn't. A month later, "Maybe take your medication earlier." I wasn't even on medication. Little confusions he planted like seeds, waiting for them to grow into doubt. I didn't know it then, but he was creating a file of concerns about my mental stability. He was preparing the narrative years before I ever stepped into that hospital hallway. And then Betrayal happened. Young, pretty, needing him. Daniel always needed to be needed. The first time I saw her was the day her name showed up on a jewelry receipt I didn't recognize. I told myself it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was only the beginning. The second year of Daniel's distance from me didn't feel like a slow drift anymore. It felt like erosion. Little pieces of my life, breaking off in ways no one else could see, but that I felt in my bones every single day. I had lived long enough to recognize when something was slipping away, and what terrified me most was how quietly it happened. Quiet can be deadly. Quiet can mask disaster better than any lie. I saw it in the hospital all the time. Patients who looked fine one day and flatlined the next. Marriages were the same. They didn't always explode. Sometimes they simply faded until one person woke up and realized they were living with a stranger. That realization hit me the first Sunday morning after Ethan left for college. I'd cooked breakfast like always, eggs, bacon, toast. I waited for Daniel to join me, but he stayed upstairs. When he finally came down, he walked past the table and said he'd already eaten. There were no dishes in the sink, no crumbs, no signs he'd touched anything in the kitchen. I sat alone at the table with 2 plates cooling in front of me, and a heaviness settled in my chest that never fully went away. I didn't know it then, but that moment mattered. It was the first time I understood I could be alone even when someone else was still living in the house. The distance grew in ways too subtle to notice day by day, but obvious when looking back. Daniel's cologne changed. His shirts changed. The way he styled his hair changed. I told myself he was simply aging, reinventing himself, adjusting to empty nest life. But something else changed too, the way he looked at me, or rather how he stopped looking at me. There was an evening last winter that still burns in my mind. The radiator was clanking. The wind whistled against the window, and I had made stew for dinner because it was the only thing that warmed me after a 12-hour shift. Daniel came home late, shrugged off his coat, surveyed the kitchen like it wasn't his home at all, and said he'd already eaten. I asked where, and he said, out. Just one word, flat, final. Then he went upstairs. That was the night I found the first piece of evidence, a strand of long golden hair on Daniel's passenger seat. It wasn't mine. I picked it up between my fingers and felt something sharp like a blade pressed to the inside of my chest. I threw it away. I told myself it had blown in from somewhere. That happens, right? Things drift into cars. That's what denial sounds like. A voice that whispers excuses until the truth becomes unrecognizable. I also started noticing that Daniel became strangely invested in my schedule, not out of care out of strategy. He'd ask when I was working, what hours which wing. I assumed he was being conversational. Later, I understood he was calculating when the house would be empty. I discovered that the hard way. One afternoon, I came home early after a patient deteriorated, and they sent me home for emotional rest. When I walked into the driveway, I saw Daniel's car parked crooked, like he'd pulled in too fast. I opened the front door and heard footsteps upstairs. I called his name. Silence followed. Then the bedroom door slammed. When he finally came down, he was flushed out of breath, shirt untucked. "What are you doing home?" he snapped. "I live here," I replied. My voice barely rose above a whisper. He muttered something about a conference call, then pushed past me and left. I didn't know it back then, but someone had been upstairs with him. Someone terrified. Someone he didn't want me to see. Meanwhile, at the hospital, my friend Marisol noticed I wasn't myself. She'd catch me staring at the wall or folding the same blanket twice. "You okay?" she'd ask. I'd smile. Nurses always smile. We're trained to tuck our pain in the pocket of our scrubs, like a Penlayite. There was a scene one night I will never forget. A patient crashed. Full arrest. Chaos filled the trauma bay alarms. Blaring bodies. Moving voices shouting orders. I did my job. Steady, focused, calm. But when the room cleared and the monitors went silent, something inside me cracked so quietly it felt like glass breaking underwater. I leaned against the wall chest, shaking, trying to catch my breath. Marisol found me. "This isn't about the patient," she whispered. She was right. It was about everything I was losing, without understanding how or why. I didn't know it then, but those breakdowns would matter later. Daniel would use them against me. There was another memory that returns to me, often a moment that should have screamed danger, but I ignored it. Daniel had taken my car for an oil change. When he returned it, the seat was moved all the way back. Too far for him, too far for me. I asked about it, and he waved it off. Mechanic probably adjusted it. Simple, dismissive, wrong. Months later, Sienna would pull footage from a nearby gas station. Footage showing Daniel driving my car with a young blonde woman in the passenger seat. They were laughing. They looked like a couple. Not a man escorting a friend, not a rideshare, not a misunderstanding. A couple. But that evidence came later. For now, all I had were signs I refused to read. The first real fracture came on our anniversary. 32 years. I dressed nicely, made reservations, texted the kids. He forgot. Not late, not last minute, he forgot entirely. When he came home that night, he smelled faintly of wine and jasmine perfume. Nothing like me. I showed him the anniversary card I'd placed on the table. He blinked. "Oh," was all he said. Work was crazy. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was brittle, shattered, the kind of laugh that slices your throat on the way out. "We don't have to celebrate everything," he added. Everything. Like 32 years meant nothing. I didn't know it then, but Brielle had written him a letter that same day. In her handwriting, Sienna later found it. "Thank you for choosing me today. It means more than you know." That was the night I realized Daniel had already emotionally divorced me. He just hadn't filed the paperwork. One more moment still haunts me. A night when snow fell heavily coating the street in white silence. I had slipped on the porch steps and twisted my ankle. I limped inside, pain throbbing. Daniel sat on the couch watching sports. I told him I needed help. He didn't look up. Ice is in the freezer, he said. That was the moment I knew I'd been alone for a long time. Long before the accident, long before the hospital, long before the lies. Loneliness can sit beside you for years without ever saying a word. What I didn't know was that this loneliness would soon turn into something sharper, something that would wake me up, something that would push me into the version of myself Daniel never saw coming. Conflict didn't arrive with sirens or explosions. It arrived in whispers, small, sharp moments that cut deeper each time. The first cut happened the week after my hospital discovery, when Daniel started hovering around me in ways that felt wrong. Not affectionate, not concerned, observing, assessing, almost studying me. One evening, I came home from a 12-hour shift, feet aching, the smell of antiseptic still clinging to my scrubs. As soon as I walked through the door, Daniel appeared in the hallway, like he'd been listening for my key. "You're home late," he said. His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory. "A patient coded." I replied, hanging my coat. I stayed to help stabilize him. He nodded, but his eyes slid down my clothes, scanning me head to toe, like I was a stranger he didn't trust. "You look tired," he added. "Your eyes are all red. Maybe you should talk to someone." The implication slapped me. "Talk to who, a doctor?" he said, voice mild but cold. "Just to make sure you're okay." There it was, a seed planted, a setup. I didn't know it then, but he was building a narrative long before I found proof. The second cut came when my medication schedule suddenly became confusing. One night, Daniel walked into the kitchen holding my pill organizer. "You missed 2 doses this week," he said. "Are you feeling forgetful?" I frowned at the box. The pills were arranged wrong. Monday's meds were in Wednesday's slot. Fridays were missing entirely. "I didn't do this," I said. He raised a brow. "So who did?" A subtle accusation, a twist of reality. Gaslighting in its most refined form. Later, Sienna confirmed that Daniel had been reorganizing my medications intentionally. A slow, deliberate erosion of my certainty. A way to make me question my own mind. The third cut happened in the driveway. I'd just returned from grocery shopping, balancing 3 heavy bags, when Daniel walked out of the garage with a clipboard in hand. "I talked to a financial consultant today," he said casually. "We should think about downsizing. This house is too big for us now." My stomach tightened. "We've talked about this," I said. "I'm not ready to move." He shrugged. "Well, maybe it's not about what you're ready for. Maybe it's about what's safe for you." Safe. The word chilled me. It didn't fit the conversation. It felt rehearsed, placed strategically like another brick in the story he was constructing. "What are you implying?" I asked quietly. He gave me a soft, pitying smile that made my skin crawl. "Nothing. I just want what's best for you." I didn't know it back then, but that sentence would appear in a document Sienna later found Daniel telling a doctor he was worried about my declining cognitive stability. But the fourth cut, the one that left a bruise I still feel, came the day I found the life insurance file. I was in the home office looking for tax papers when I opened the wrong drawer. Inside was a thick envelope labeled Heart Policy. Heart. Brielle's last name. I opened it. There it was, a $400,000 life insurance policy taken out 3 months earlier. Insured Daniel Shaw. Beneficiary Brielle Hart. Not his wife, not his children, his mistress. My pulse roared in my ears. My knees weakened. The policy wasn't just financial betrayal. It was intent. It was a future built without me, a future where Brielle replaced me entirely. I closed the drawer just as Daniel walked into the room. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone sharper than usual. "Looking for old tax forms," I said, forcing the drawer shut. His eyes flicked to the handle, then to my face, calculating, checking for signs of suspicion. Next time, he said, "Just ask me. You've been forgetful lately." Strike number 4. The fifth cut came disguised as concern. We were eating dinner in silence, 2 strangers sharing a table, when Daniel set his fork down and said, "Maybe you should take some time off work. Why, you've seemed out of it, distracted, emotional." I stared at him. "I'm tired, Daniel, that's all." "You cried in the laundry room last week," he said. My chest tightened. He'd watched me, Not comforted me, not asked, watched. I heard you. He continued, leveling a sympathetic tone that felt like poison. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Another piece in his narrative. Another step toward Eleanor is unstable. The 6th cut came from the hospital. My supervisor, Janet, pulled me aside after morning rounds. Is everything okay at home? She asked gently. My heart lurched. Why? We received a call from your husband. He expressed concerns about your emotional well-being. He suggested we keep an eye on you. Heat flooded my face. He what? He told us you've been forgetful, distracted, unsteady. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Daniel had taken his private gaslighting and made it public. He was building witnesses, creating a record, crafting a story long before I even knew I was inside it. The 7th cut arrived wrapped in betrayal disguised as kindness. One snowy evening, I came home to find Daniel in the living room with a stack of papers. Sit, he said. We need to talk. My pulse quickened. About what? Your stress, he said gently. Your confusion, your emotional ups and downs. I spoke to someone who specializes in marital strain. He suggested we document things just to keep track. Document. That word felt like a warning. He handed me a packet. Inside were forms for a psychological evaluation. Forms he'd already signed. Forms that painted me as unstable, forgetful, volatile. I set them on the table, forcing my hands not to shake. I don't need an evaluation, I whispered. Everyone needs help sometimes, he replied, voice soft, comforting, deadly. You don't want things to get worse, do you? That was the moment I realized Daniel wasn't just drifting away. He was preparing for something. Preparing to erase me. Preparing to replace me. Preparing to make sure no one would believe me when the truth came out. And that's when the conflict truly began. Because something inside me, something quiet, something fierce, finally woke up. When the 3rd week began, the house no longer felt like the place where I'd raised Ethan and Chloe. It felt like a stage Daniel was redesigning for a play where I had no role. Every corner smelled like Brielle's cheap vanilla perfume. Even the hallway lights seemed dimmer, as if the house itself understood I was being pushed out. I watched from Sienna's monitor as Daniel sat Brielle on our couch, the exact spot where I used to curl up after double shifts. He adjusted pillows behind her back. That small gesture, gentle practice, cut deeper than any insult. It was the tenderness he used to reserve for me, offered to someone who barely knew the life he was dismantling. You should rest here, he told her softly. Rest where? In the home. I cleaned, decorated, protected, the home where I'd bandaged his wounds after his cycling accident, where we'd rocked our newborns to sleep. The familiarity in his voice felt like a knife twisting into old memories. Brielle looked around. It feels weird, like I'm intruding. Daniel chuckled. You're not intruding. The previous owner moved out. The previous owner. I leaned forward in my chair, nails sinking into my palms. Not wife, not partner of 32 years, previous owner. Sienna muttered. That one line alone could win your case. But he wasn't done. On screen, he walked to our bookshelf, running his fingers across the framed photos, our kids, our vacations, the life we built. We'll replace all this soon, he said. Fresh start. My throat tightened. A fresh start that erased me. Later that day, he called someone. Sienna amplified the audio. Yeah, Dr. Faraday, he said. I need an evaluation scheduled soon. Eleanor's been unstable, forgetful, confused. My jaw dropped. He was narrating my mental collapse like a script he'd rehearsed. She keeps misplacing things, getting dates wrong, crying over nothing. I think she needs a clinical assessment, I whispered. He switched the appointment reminders on my phone. He did that. Sienna nodded grimly. Classic setup. A week earlier, I had missed my annual checkup because the time mysteriously changed in my calendar. I blamed exhaustion. Now I saw the pattern clearly. Daniel had been constructing evidence of my decline. Open loop formed in my mind. How long has he been planning this? That evening, the camera caught him pouring a glass of wine in my kitchen. Our kitchen. He handed it to Brielle. I don't know why she held on to all this stuff, he said, waving toward my cooking books, my apron still hanging by the fridge. Brielle giggled. It's cute, old-fashioned, like something from a movie. She got old, Daniel replied. She stopped taking care of herself. old. I felt something inside me snap quietly, decisively. The next mini-drama unfolded when Daniel received a call from his parents. He turned on speaker. His mother asked, "Are you and Eleanor working things out?" Daniel sighed dramatically. "I'm trying, Mom. But she's not well. She gets emotional paranoid. I don't know how much more I can do." Paranoid? The man who hid a 2-year double life was calling me paranoid. Sienna shook her head. "He's setting the groundwork. He wants them to testify you're unstable." By midweek, Brielle started playing house. I watched her try on my sweaters, my scarves, even the cardigan Ethan bought me last Christmas. "It looks cozy," she said. Daniel laughed. "You wear it better than she ever did." Every sentence was an emotional scalpel. I absorbed each cut quietly. But the deepest wound came Thursday. The camera in the office recorded Daniel rummaging through my important documents, birth certificates, tax files, our mortgage. He pulled out a folder labeled insurance. He paused, smirking. Soon he whispered, "Soon everything will be in order." He dialed a number. "This is Daniel Shaw," he told the representative. "I want to confirm the beneficiary for policy 44SNB." I stiffened. He listened, nodding. "Yes." Brielle Hart. "Correct, no changes needed." My breath left my lungs. He'd added her as beneficiary to a policy he bought in secret. And regarding spouse coverage, he continued, "I may need guidance on claiming guardianship if mental decline is documented." Guardianship. My chest felt hollow. That was the moment when grief evaporated and something colder took its place. Not rage, not despair, resolve. Eleanor Shaw died to him long ago, but the woman watching from that surveillance room was being reborn. I didn't realize it then, but this would matter later. The last mini-scene that sealed my transformation came late that night. Daniel sat beside Brielle on my couch. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think she'll fight you?" she asked. He smiled. "She's tired. She's confused. She won't see it coming." I straightened in my seat. I saw everything coming. Every lie, every script, every trap. He thought I was weak. He thought I was finished. Sienna glanced at me. Ready to burn it all down, I didn't blink. "Yes." And that was the moment the nurse became the warrior. The night of the dinner, the air in my house felt different. Heavier, tighter, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I arrived early with Sienna and attorney Paige Dalton. We positioned ourselves quietly, each of us knowing exactly what needed to happen. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was surgery, and I was the scalpel. By 6:30, the dining room was glowing under soft golden lights. The china I'd polished the night before sat perfectly arranged. A table set for closure, a table set for war. Daniel entered from the hallway, wearing the charming smile outsiders believed in, the practiced, polished expression that had fooled judges' clients, and even me, for 3 decades. He leaned closer, voice low, gentle, pretending to be the concerned husband. "You holding up?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice calm, too calm. "Tonight is necessary." He didn't see the trap. Why would he? In his mind, I was still that exhausted nurse who came home and trusted every word he said. But tonight, trust had been replaced by precision. Guests began arriving. His parents, my children, Ethan and Chloe, our neighbors, his law partner, and a few friends who knew us as the stable couple. Daniel greeted each one with warm hugs and a sympathetic expression. "Eleanor's been struggling," he said softly. "Be patient with her." I stood in the doorway and watched his story spread like smoke across a room full of people willing to inhale it. He thought he had already won. That delusion would make this moment unforgettable. Dinner began quietly. Forks clicked, glasses touched. Small talk floated through the room, each polite laugh tightening the rope Daniel had unknowingly stepped into. When the dishes were cleared, I stood. "I called everyone here," I said, "because I think we should talk openly, as a family." Daniel gave a rehearsed sigh. "Eleanor, maybe tonight isn't the best." Paige pressed a button on the small remote she carried under the table, and the first audio clip blasted through the speakers. Daniel's voice filled the room. "She got old. She stopped being interesting. Some people just aren't worth the work anymore." Gasps spilled across the table. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel shot to his feet. Eleanor turned that off. I took one step back, letting him flail. Another clip. Sienna's doing played immediately after Just box up the old photos. The previous owner doesn't matter. This is Brielle's home now. Previous owner. The phrase sliced through the room. Ethan looked at his father as if seeing him for the first time. Dad. What the hell is this? Daniel stammered. This is taken out of context. But Paige clicked again. A video appeared on the TV. Daniel leading Brielle into our bedroom, helping her settle into my side of the bed, kissing her forehead, calling her baby, calling her my future. Every second undeniable. Daniel lunged toward the TV. Sienna stepped between him and the screen. Touch that and it counts as destruction of evidence, she said calmly. The room went silent. I moved to the head of the table and placed a folder beside his empty plate. These, I said, are the bank statements. Every payment you made for Brielle's apartment, 23 months, all withdrawn from our joint account. His father stared at him. Daniel, you stole from your marriage. Paige opened the next folder. Here is the life insurance policy, $400,000, with Brielle listed as beneficiary. His mother began crying. And this page said, sliding out another form, is the email you sent Dr. Faraday requesting mental competency documents for your wife, explaining she has cognitive issues, asking how soon guardianship could be approved. Daniel's face drained of color. I never... Paige cut him off. We have the full email chain. Your signature, your IP address, and the timestamp. I stepped closer, my voice steady. You were going to have me declared unstable. You wanted full control of the house, the accounts, everything. When Brielle recovered, you planned to start a new life using the pieces of mine. The final clip began to play. Daniel's voice again, calm, confident, cruel. If she's declared incompetent, I'll take over everything. Silence slammed into the room. My daughter whispered, How could you? Daniel turned desperate. Eleanor, stop this. Let's talk privately. No, I said. You lost that privilege when you replaced me without telling me I was leaving. He reached for my arm. I stepped away. Sit down, Paige said firmly. You're going to hear all of it. Sienna walked around the table and placed a small flash drive beside him. This contains the footage of you bringing Brielle into this home. You throwing away Eleanor's personal items. You calling her unbalanced. You preparing to sell the house. You telling hospital staff she needed psychiatric care. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for any sympathetic face. There were none. His father stood. You disgust me, his mother whispered. You broke your family. Daniel collapsed back into his chair, breathing hard. But the climax wasn't over. Paige placed one final document in front of him. Here are the divorce papers, filed. Effective immediately. You will receive notice of restraining orders, asset freezes, and criminal investigations. Daniel's jaw clenched. You blindsided me. No, I said. You blindsided yourself. He slammed a hand on the table. You think you've won? You think this makes you strong? I felt something shift inside me, a calmness cutting through the storm. I leaned in. I'm not trying to be strong, I said quietly. I'm finally refusing to be weak. Daniel stared at me shocked, as if he'd never seen me before. That was my moment. I smiled, cold, precise, and walked out of the room without looking back. When I stepped out of that dining room, the cold night air hit my face like a baptism. Sharp cleansing, almost shocking in its clarity. I walked onto the porch, gripping the railing, breathing in the kind of slow, steady breaths I used to teach my patients during panic attacks. Behind me, voices erupted, accusations, confusion, the unraveling of Daniel's carefully crafted image, but none of it felt like my burden anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for protecting the peace he pretended to maintain. Sienna joined me a moment later, silent at first, then offering a small nod. It's done, she said. He'll spend years trying to clean up the fallout. I didn't answer right away. My hands were still vibrating from adrenaline, but beneath that tremor was something unexpectedly steady. Freedom. Inside I could hear Paige calmly explaining next steps to Daniel's parents, her voice firm and precise. She outlined asset freezes, court dates, investigations, and protective orders. The legal machine had been activated, and Daniel Shaw, manipulator, liar, architect of a double life, had finally run out of space to maneuver. Christine Sienna said gently, "Are you okay?" I looked up at the winter sky, the stars faint behind the city glow. "I'm more than okay," I whispered. "I'm awake." The door behind us opened, and Chloe stepped out onto the porch. Her face was blotchy from crying, but there was something fierce in her eyes, an anger that mirrored my own. "Mom," she said, voice thick. "I am so sorry. I didn't know. I should have seen something." I shook my head. "Sweetheart, he fooled everyone, including himself." She hugged me tightly as if grounding both of us. Ethan followed a moment later, jaw clenched, hands shaking with fury. "He talked about you like that. He brought another woman into your bed." I swear I put a hand on his arm. "No, we're not fighting him with rage. That's his language. We're done speaking it." He looked at me shocked by the steadiness in my voice. Sienna exhaled softly. "Your mom has the upper hand now. Legally, financially, publicly." "And emotionally," I added. "He doesn't get to live in my head anymore." As if summoned by the mention of him, Daniel appeared in the doorway. His once confident posture collapsed into something smaller, desperate. "Eleanor, please," he choked out. "We can fix this. We can talk." "No," I said without raising my voice. "You only talk when you think you're losing." He reached for the railing, face raw with panic. "You blindsided me." "No," I replied calmly. "You built a life on lies. I simply turned on the lights." Sienna stepped between us. "Daniel, the restraining order begins now. Speak to your lawyer if you have questions." His eyes flicked between us, anger, disbelief, then something like fear. Fear of a woman he underestimated for too long. He shut the door, the sound final. Chloe wiped her face. "What happens now?" I looked at both my children, grown shaken, but standing strong beside me. "Now," I said, "we rebuild. But this time, it's my foundation, my rules." Sienna nodded. "You're not done yet, not by a long shot." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. Neither is he. Because the truth was simple. Daniel thought he'd destroyed me, thought he'd replaced me, thought he'd buried me under lies and legal manipulation. But in doing so, he handed me every weapon I needed, and I wasn't finished using them. If you're still here with me, listening to every rise and fall of this story, thank you. When a life breaks apart, the silence afterward can feel endless. But sharing it with you makes the pieces settle in a different way. What happened to me wasn't just betrayal. It was a reminder that even after decades of loyalty, a person can choose to rewrite your place in their world. And you can choose to walk out of it. When I left that house tonight, I didn't leave as the woman Daniel tried to erase. I left as someone who finally remembered her own name, her own worth, her own voice. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, subscribe. This story isn't over. Not for me. Not for anyone who's ever had to rebuild from ashes someone else tried to bury them under.